In this video, I'm going to show you how to alter the length of a garment after the body has already been knit up and it's been knit from the bottom up. So in essence, this video shows you how to undo a cast-on edge. If a garment has been knit top down, altering the body length after the fact is easy because you can always just undo the bound-off edge. But in a bottom-up sweater, you can't undo a cast-on edge the same way. So the only way to alter the length is to actually perform a bit of surgery on your sweater. You need to cut your fabric, secure your body stitches back on the needle, and then you can reknit the body or a section of the body, but this time going from the top down to the hem. Sweater surgery like this can definitely be scary, but I hope that this video can demystify the process just a bit so that you can try this technique confidently should you ever need to undo a cast-on edge. So let's get started. I've created several little mini samples here that I've knit up for the purpose of this video. They are meant to represent what the body of a bottom-up pullover sweater would look like, just in a little mini form here. They're all knit in the round, but I'll also show you how this has worked when working flat as well, but really the overall technique is the same regardless. So in my first demo here, I have this striped piece. This is the bottom hem, so this is my cast-on edge. I'd worked in 2x2 rib for my hem, and then I'd worked the body in these stripes, and then this was the top hem, and this was my bound-off edge. So pretending that this is a sweater, let's say I want to be able to make it longer. So what I want to do is I want to secure stitches onto a needle right above the hem. So the first thing we're going to want to do is let's turn this over so that the bottom hem, so our cast-on edge, is at the top here. Before we cut anything, we want to secure a round of stitches onto a needle. So I recommend using a skinny needle. This is like a US 1 or US 2. So even though I knit this on a US 8 needle, you want a much smaller needle to be able to get into the stitches. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is to find where your beginning of round is. So I had gone ahead and placed a marker at where I thought around my beginning of round was. It doesn't have to be the exact beginning of round. The most important thing is that you get a round of stitches secured on the needle, but it's just easier if you can kind of find where that beginning of round is. So I kind of marked it already with a removable marker. Then you want to decide where you want to be picking up your round of stitches. I typically like to do at least a round or two below where, I want to be cutting. So in this case, because we're dealing with stripes, it makes this process a bit easier. In the other demos, I'll show you what it's like to do it without stripes. But I'm going to want to go into the bottom round of the orange. So not the top round, the bottom round. That's the round I want to secure, and then I'll lengthen from there. So I have my approximate beginning of round marked here. So actually where I want to go in is going to be right under there. And again, where you decide to secure your stitches is totally up to you. I just recommend going at least a round or two below where your hem treatment might be. So here's my beginning of round, and I'm going to go into that bottom round of the orange stitches, and you want to go into the right leg of a stitch. So right into here. Let me show you that again. So see how each stitch looks like a V? You're going to want to go into the right leg of each of the V's. Again, because this is a striped piece, it makes it really easy to know exactly which round we're going to be going into. That's why it was sort of a good example to show for our first one. But as I said, I have other little demos. I'll show you what to do when you don't have the ease of these stripes. But I'm going to go into each of the right legs of each of the stitch. And if you need to hold the fabric up like this, that's okay as well, whatever is the most comfortable for you. So I'm going to keep going around until I picked up every stitch, every right leg of each stitch in this round. I've almost made my way back around, just a few more. And sometimes it's helpful to sort of move the stitches to the other end of the tip so you can easily get around. So let's see, I just have this one. And so one thing that can also be helpful is you should know from your pattern how many stitches you had at the body right above the hem. So you can count to make sure that you have the right number and that you didn't miss any. So the next step, I'm just going to go ahead and remove that little marker that I'd used to help me identify the beginning of round. Okay, so now we have a round of stitches all secured on our needle. So now comes the scary cutting part. So you'll want to get some tools ready first. So I have a pair of scissors, and I like also using a tapestry needle, and I'll show you why in just a second. So we're going to take our scissors, and starting with our first stitch here that we had picked up, we're going to want to cut into the right leg of the stitch right above that. So see how here's our stitch on the needle, and then look for the V right above it. So here's that top orange stripe V. I'm going to insert my scissors into the right leg, and then I'm going to cut. And then I'm going to put my scissors down, and this is where the tapestry needle is going to help to sort of undo the stitch. So I'm going to insert it into the left side of that V just to sort of undo it a little bit. And usually that first one, because sometimes you might not have cut all the way, which it looks like maybe I did not. So see how I still have that little strand here, and that can happen. So you just want to take your scissor, just making sure you're getting in there. I'm going to make sure I cut all the way through. There we go. So now we know we sort of released it. So then you're going to go into each of those V's above, and you're just going to undo each of them. So first with the right leg, then with the left leg. And as you can see, you don't have to be scared, because look, we have our round of stitches that are secured right here. So we're undoing the hem, but we're not unraveling all the knitting. We have our stitches secured. So you're just going to go into each of those stitches in the round right above where you had secured. And that's where I find the tapestry needle, it doesn't have to be a tapestry needle. You can use any other little tool, but I just find that it's easy to get into those stitches. As you can see, as my hem is coming off, you don't have to worry, because look, we have our stitches nice and secured here on the needle. So far, surgery is going well. So I'm just going to continue in this manner. So see how I'm just going into that top, the round right above, and I'm just undoing it. So you're really actually only making one cut mark into that right leg of the first stitch that's above your held stitches. And then the rest of the time, you're just using a little tool like a tapestry needle to undo each of the stitches. So I'm just going to continue in this manner until I come back around. And one thing you can do as your tail kind of becomes a little bit long. If it's getting in the way, especially, it's not a big deal in a small piece like this, but if it's a big sweater, you can always trim it. So I'm almost done. I just have a couple more stitches to undo. Okay, so one thing I want to show you, because I had been changing color, I have my two colors tied together a little bit, so I just have to undo that. Okay, so that was the last of that round. So because I was switching colors every couple of rounds and carrying it up, I still have this color attached. You'll see in the other demo that that won't always be the case. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut that. Okay, so our hem is now off and our stitches are on the needle. Now, one thing that can sometimes happen, as shown right here, is that, see how it looks like I'm missing a stitch? So that last stitch, when it unraveled, it had a little tail to it, which often happens. And so the stitch never kind of got secured on to the needle. You know, it was on there, but then once we unraveled to that point, it sort of undid itself. And that is, that's totally okay, because what I'm going to show you to do next is I actually recommend tinking back a few stitches before you rejoin your yarn and start knitting again. So in this case, because this stitch sort of fell off, and you could tell because as I separate my needle tips, I see that it's missing a stitch. You'd also know because if you recounted your stitches, you would see that you were one off. So if this happens to you, don't worry about it. What you want to do is we will go ahead and stick our left needle tip. Let's go into the stitch below that, just like that, and undo this. Because really we want this to be a nice longer tail for weaving in after, and that's why I often recommend tinking back a few stitches. So in case you're not familiar with tinking, that's where you go into the stitch below and secure it on the left needle and then take the yarn out. So again, I'm taking my left needle and I'm going into the stitch below, just like that, and then just taking the stitch off and pulling. This is still not long enough of a tail to easily weave in, so I'm just going to keep tinking until I'm happy with the length. Okay, one more. All right. That's a better tail. Okay, so you could tell this was our beginning of round here because that was where the color changed. But we now have all of our stitches on the needle. And again, this was our bound off edge. So we're now going top down to make the piece longer. So in this case, I would be ready to rejoin my yarn. And again, because I was doing stripes, I'm going to want to rejoin this color here. And then I'm going to want to take the needle size that I had used, which in my case was the US 8 needle. And I'm just going to knit right off of this skinny circular. You could also transfer all of these onto the right needle if you prefer, but typically I find it works just fine knitting off of that needle. So I'm going to insert my US 8 into that first stitch and leaving a nice long tail for weaving in. I'm going to drape the yarn over my US 8 so that I can knit that first stitch. So I'm going to knit all of my stitches here until I can tell I'm at my beginning of round point, which is easy for me again because I had done stripes. So as soon as I'm done with the teal yarn, okay, I know I'm back to my beginning of round, and I can take a marker and place it, and then I will just continue knitting. So as you can see, now I have everything on the needles. I have my beginning of round marker secured again, and I'm ready to make my piece longer and then redo the hem. So in this example, it was fairly easy because we were working in stripes. Often the trickiest part of this whole thing is securing that round or row of stitches onto your small circular. We had a guide because we had stripes. So what do you do if it's not in stripes? So let me show you in the next demo some tips on how you can do it. So here's an example of another in the round piece, but there are no stripes. So here is my cast on edge. I did just a little bit of garter stitch at the bottom here, and this is my top. So this was my bound off edge. This is my cast on edge. So saying we want to undo the cast on edge and make this longer, what we're going to want to do is turn it so that the cast on edge is on top. And then just like we did in the other example, I'm going to flip it over because I want to start at my beginning of round. And I'd gone ahead and marked where around where my beginning of round was. And just like the other example, I'm going to use a much smaller little circular needle. But we don't have the convenience of those stripes, right? So everything is the same color. So how do we know which round we're always going to be going into? So I'm going to look at my garter edge here. So see how we have all of these bumps? I'm going to say that I want to secure the round that is the second level of V's under the bumps. So let's look at these bumps here. Here is the first V, and then this would be the second V. So either you could just visually, as you're going along, always be looking for the bump and then counting down 2, or alternatively, you can place some markers to help serve as guides. So I'm going to go ahead and at least insert my needle into the first one, so the right leg of that V, and then I'm going to just sort of trace over with my finger and look, okay, so this would be another one over here. And I could confirm that by looking at the bump here and then going down 2 V's. And then I'm going to flip it over and put a couple of guides on this side. You don't have to do the guides, but I just find that that often they could be helpful to just make sure that you're on the right track as you're securing those stitches. And so here's another one. And again, I'm just sort of looking here are my bumps, and then I'm looking for the full V. So there's one, and I'm going to go into the second one. And let's do one more on this side. So it'd be right here. So the key is really using your hem, because it's assuming that your hem treatment is going to be different than your stockinette stitch fabric. Either it'll be ribbing or garter like this, and using that as sort of your guide and then counting down from there. So let's flip it back over. And I'm going to go ahead and remove that initial marker I had used to sort of find my beginning of round. We had already secured that first stitch. So just like we had done in the first example, I'm going to go along and just pick up the right leg of each of the stitches all the way around. And again, I'm sort of counting 2 rounds down from my garter bump. So I would go into this one, then this one, And if it helps to kind of use your other hand to hold the fabric, whatever works for you to sort of be able to see the fabric well and hold it in place. Okay, and I can see I'm just getting to one of my guides, and yep, that is in the right place. So at least I know I'm on the right track here. So I can go ahead and then remove it. See, sometimes if you're just not sure, you just want to go again. Okay, let's count down. Here's my bump, and then it's 1, and then it's 2. Okay, so I'm almost back to where I started. Just have a few more to pick up. And again, I sort of got past all of my removable marker guides, but I can just be looking at my garter bumps here and then counting down. So here's 1 V, here's the second V. I'm always going to the right leg of the second V down from the bump. And right here. And one thing to keep in mind when you're working in the round, you might feel like you might be off because see how we're back to the beginning here and it seems like where we started is lower than where we wound up. Because you're working in the round, you're actually, when working in the round, you're working in a spiral. So where you start never is at the same spot as where you end. So that's why it's good to use that hem as a guide because as you can see that look here with the trim. So see how the garter trim is down here where we started, but then over here, it's further up. So that's just showing sort of how working in the round creates that spiral. So the key is using that trim as your guide, and don't worry when you get back to the beginning if it doesn't look like they meet up because it won't do that when you're working in the round. So now we have secured all of our stitches on a needle. So this is a much smaller piece than my first demo. I'd used like a 16-inch circular when I made it. The needle I used to put these stitches on is a 24-inch, and that's totally fine. But that's why they're, it's stretched out just a little bit. But now we will be ready to cut just like we had done in the first demo. So I'll just do that again to show you. So here was our first stitch. And so we want to cut into the right leg of the stitch, the V right above it. So I'm going to insert my scissor into that right leg and cut. Okay, now I'm ready to take my tapestry needle and I just start undoing. Just like the first demo, sometimes when you make that initial cut, it might not have grabbed all of the stitch. And again, in this case, it did the same thing. There was just a little bit left of that stitch. So we'll just cut again. There we go. And so now the stitch has fully been released. And now I'm going to go in to those stitches, the V's, right above the stitches that are secured on the needle and just slowly be undoing them. And just like in the other demo, you don't have to worry because look, the stitches that you had secured on the needle beforehand, they are sitting nice and safely right there. So I will just continue to undo all of these stitches that were on the cast on side until I come back around. Okay, we've almost reached where we had started. I just have a few more. Okay, so as you can see, I'm just going to undo that last one, and it just comes right off. But just like in our first demo, see how that last stitch, so it always just has that really little tail, but it definitely is a stitch. So the solution for that is we're going to tink back a few stitches here. But this time what I'm gonna do is, instead of using the small needle that I had been using for the pickup, I'm gonna go ahead and use the needle that I'm going to be transferring everything onto. So this much bigger needle. So first I want to secure that stitch that had come undone here. So to do that, let me just move this out of the way here. So I'm going to take my needle tip and I'm going to insert it into the loop that tail is coming out of. So I'm just going to put it through right there, and then you can just pull that tail through. And then we're going to do that for a bunch of the stitches here, just so that we can get this tail to be a bit longer so that we can easily weave it in later. So just going to keep tinking. And again, if you haven't tinked before, you just want to go into the loop that the strand here is coming out of. So take your left needle, you stick it in the loop right there, and then you can just pull the stitch right out, just like that. It looks like this one just got a little tangled. So there we go. Okay, so that's a much better tail length. I feel comfortable to be able to weave that in. So then that means I'm ready to rejoin my yarn and start working in the round. So I will take my yarn here, and I'm going to take the other end of my circular. Again, the stitches that are on kind of the spare needle, they'll just sit there as I'm knitting off of it. And I will leave a nice long tail, rejoin the yarn, and just start knitting. Now first I'm going to knit those stitches that I had tinked. So those are the ones that are on my working circular here. Okay, so I've made my way to that other end. So then I will place my marker on my needle because that's my beginning of round. And then I sort of just need to shimmy my stitches because now I'm back to just the stitches that are holding on the spare circular that I had used to pick up. And I'm just going to knit off of it just like that. Okay, so then I am just working in the round, and all the stitches will be back on the needle, and I will work my hem just like we had done in the first demo. Here is one more in the round sample I wanted to show you. So it's similar to the one that we just did, where it's just one color and there is a, this is our cast on edge right here. I had worked some broken rib. This was our top edge. This is where I bound off. One idea that you could do is, if you're working on a sweater and you think there's a chance that you might want to alter the length, this is a lifeline right here, and I'll turn over so you can see. So when I was finished working the hem and I worked about 1 or 2 rounds, and then I took a tapestry needle threaded with just some this is just some cotton scrap yarn, and I threaded it through the needle so that it would hold the stitches at that point. And what that does is it just makes my life a little bit easier should I decide I do want to lengthen, because just like in the other demos, what you could do, we would turn it over so our cast on edge is up. But instead of having to count the rounds and mark our guides to make sure we're going in the right spot, you could just thread your needle through each of the stitches that the lifeline is on. So let me show you that real quick. So here is my skinny circular again. So again, instead of having to count or anything, I just go into each of the stitches that my lifeline is threaded through. And if it makes it easier, you could do it one at a time, and you can sort of lift this up a bit and see, okay, yep, it's coming right through there, and do it one at a time. Or you could just guide it through over a bunch of the stitches, and then you can just pull it through like this. And if you've never placed a lifeline before, I'll put a link in the description to my photo tutorial that shows you exactly how you would put a lifeline in. But this might come in handy if you decide with a piece that you don't want to lengthen it and you're happy with how it came out, then you could just take the lifeline out and not have to do any sweater surgery at all. But this can be helpful if you think there is a chance you're working on a bottom-up sweater where you might want to do that. Last example is I just want to show you, this is just a flat swatch. So this is just stockinette stitch worked back and forth, knit and purl rows. And it's the same technique if you needed to, if you want to undo your cast on edge, but I just thought I would show you a demonstration. This is our cast on edge down here. So just like when we're working the round, I'm going to flip it so that my cast on edge stitch is at the top. And similar to the last demo, because I don't have a lifeline, I am just going to count down from these garter bumps. I'm going to go into, again, the second row of V's underneath this bump. And the only real difference is that when you're working flat, you just have to be a little bit careful on that edge. Sometimes that edge stitch can be a little bit tricky to first identify. So sometimes I like to identify sort of not the very edge, but I'll go just a couple stitches down. So I know this is one of the V's, and then I'll look over, yep, this will be the other one, and then this should be the first one. So I'll go ahead and insert my needle into the right leg of that V, and then I'll just continue to do that all along that row. And again, in this case, because I don't have a lifeline, I'm just using the hem treatment as my guide and making sure as I look at it, okay, here's my garter bump, and I'm going into the second row of full V's that I see underneath that. But as you can see, it's the same type of technique. And once I would have all those on, I'd do the same thing where I cut into the right leg of the V up above and just undo it. So one important tip I want to leave you with is that I suggest creating a practice piece to experiment with before you practice this on an actual sweater. So if you have a sweater that you want to be able to undo the cast on edge, just do a little in the round swatch like I did with these examples and practice, because the more that you just get comfortable doing it, then the less scary it's going to appear when you actually do it on a real live sweater. I hope this sweater surgery demonstration has been helpful and provides you a bit more confidence should you ever want to undo a cast on edge in the future.